Welcome to Revolver's Fan First podcast, where we go deep into artists' histories because all artists were fans first. So today we have Andy Biersack of Black Veil Brides, his solo project, Andy Black, and yeah, a musician, if you will.
And currently in a hotel room in Illinois. I'm the current resident of a hotel room.
Really? That's very Nikki Sixx, circa the 80s. Living in a hotel.
Living in a hotel. No, I'm on tour, so that is why. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. How's it all going?
It's good. Yeah, we've been out for about a month, and it's just, I mean, the reality is there's nothing that can replace a live show. All of us in the rock community made as a concerted effort as possible to try to do the live streams and everything else, and those are a lot of fun, and I think that people around the world did enjoy those. But being able to have the one-to-one situation where you're singing, for me as a vocalist, singing along with people in the crowd and you know, seeing people's excitement and reactions every night, it's the greatest. You know, that's what makes live rock music just something so special.
We're very excited to welcome it back to our shores. We have our second biggest city came out of lockdown today. So we're glad to see America embracing it. And now, so in terms of your history as a fan, obviously KISS played a big role in your early life. I read in your book, your dad had Batman trading cards and you actually thought that they were KISS or KISS was Batman. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so I first found my dad's 77 KISS trading cards in our house, and you know, my only frame of reference, I was 3 years old or something, so my only frame of reference was Batman or comic book characters. And in 1994, KISS wasn't wearing makeup and wasn't culturally as relevant even as they are today. It was sort of a down period for the band, and I didn't really know what the hell it was. And so the following year I just became obsessed. My dad showed me all their stuff and we went and got VHS tapes, and then Halloween of '95 they did the Unplugged acoustic show on MTV, and I watched that and just fell in love with it and became so obsessed that every day when I got home from school, I would ask my dad to paint my face like Gene. And I had a t-shirt. I had, you know, short blonde hair as a little kid. Yeah. So I had a t-shirt that he would rubber band around my head. So it was like my long hair. And then I'd wear a KISS shirt, and I had gotten like a play guitar with little buttons on it. It was a black and silver, you know, fake guitar. And I had that, and I would take, my dad had long black socks, and I would cut finger holes out of the long black socks so I could have cool Gene Simmons gloves. And I'd wear my snow boots, and I would do a whole KISS show singing along with our VHS tapes every day after school. And it was, you know, in retrospect, I'm very appreciative that that he was down for that. Yeah,
he was a musician once upon a time too, your dad.
Yeah, before I was born, he was in a lot of bands. He was in punk bands, and you know, he played at CBGB's with the original Misfits lineup and Stiff Little Fingers and a bunch of other bands.
Yeah, what do you think his perspective on rock and roll? How did that impact your perspective on being a rock musician, and also what was possible?
It was just always part of my life, like because of him being involved in it and being a fan. My introduction to really music was kind of twofold. It was my mom's listening to like Bruce Springsteen and Tracy Chapman and singer-songwriter type stuff. And then my dad introducing me to the theatricality of punk rock and hair metal and classic rock and all that stuff. So for me, I kind of look at how I ended up as a musician or as a songwriter as kind of a blend of all those things, because this was also a time where in the US, wrestling was huge. I mean, it's big now, but this was like the real boom of WCW and WWF. And there was Sting, who was a wrestler in WCW, white face paint, long black hair, black clothes, or black leather trench coat. All of these things were aligning where, like, you know, for me, it was like the holy trinity of like dudes I wanted to be when I was 5 was Gene Simmons, Batman, and Sting from WCW. So I think in a weird way, I kind of ended up in many ways as visually kind of a few of those things.
Yeah, or you can see it. Like I think there's a part of us, especially with artists, like that stays the inner child is alive. Like that's one of the cool things about being a creative person, because you kind of being a creative is having that inner child element. Would you say
Yeah.
like what you got into with your mother plays into a bit more what you did with the solo stuff?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's also the discovery of music in general for me as a kid. I'm just old enough that it's a pre-internet world, and then suddenly that we have a computer and there's the internet. So I existed as a child knowing nothing about the internet, and then I also was young enough that when we got a computer and printed a photo, I thought it was like a magic trick. So I'm kind of that last generation of people who were kind of in between the two, and so I remember as a little kid, the way that I found out who Metallica was that I knew one other kid in the neighborhood who listened to rock music, and I only knew about KISS, and he only knew about Metallica. So I would bring my KISS VHS tapes to his house, and he brought the Black Album tour VHS to my house, and that was so I knew two bands, and so. And again, sort of funny how things turn out, but the other night getting to open for Metallica about a week ago, and watching them, from the stage play the Black Album in reverse, kind of a nice full circle moment.
Dude, that's huge. What was that? Yeah, I mean that's a pipe dream of so many bands.
We've had so many of those, been really lucky in a lot of instances. We did a tour, we toured soccer stadiums with Motley Crue, and gotten to meet all these legends. And it's a very, for me as such a fan of so many things, and being a kid who grew up in a small town in Ohio, it's the odds of these things ever happening are so infinitesimal that I have such a level of appreciation for the opportunities that I've been given because of this, crazy career.
Question for you. What did these rock stars that you shared a stage with impart any knowledge?
Yeah, early on when we first started kind of, I don't know what you would say, when we first started kind of, I guess, making an impact to where people of that caliber knew about the band, we were very fortunate to be able to start, whether it was socially meeting some of these people, or, award shows, or as you said, touring and playing shows with them, the opportunities to meet some of these legends started to happen, whether it's Alice Cooper, Dee Snider, Sebastian Bach, Nikki Sixx, all these guys who were incredibly supportive, and all of whom, were happy to see, I guess, to some level, the theatricality or the fun of rock come back in a certain way. And so, in different ways, all of them have been hugely impactful. Alice Cooper to this day still regularly cites us in interviews. I mean, in Rolling Stone recently, he talked about us. And, Dee Snider is somebody who, from Twisted Sister, is somebody who has been a huge influence on me. His book is one of the things that I read, right when we first started touring. His book had come out, and I read it on the plane to our first UK tour. And it was just so impactful because I saw so much of what I was experiencing in my life and what he had gone through. And it was just really important. I've stayed in contact with him. And, I remember the first time I sat down with Nikki Sixx, and he gave me some like financial advice, and, how to be smart with money and that kind of thing. So, it would be impossible to qualify exactly every bit of advice, but more so just the reality of having these legends support what you're doing is such a validation of what you're doing.
Especially when you showed such devotion as a kid to the whole concept of this vein of rock and roll, which obviously Kiss are a part of. And, you said something interesting about like that was one of the bands that kind of taught you about a chorus being an invitation to participate. When did you first start participating in music? Like what were your first shows like, and did you have that experience?
The first concert I ever went to was first rock concert I ever went to was Billy Idol. I was as a little kid, I would go to this record store, little mom and pop record store in our neighborhood, and that's where I got all my like cassettes, whether it was Kiss or Metallica or whatever else. And the lady who owned the store got a kick out of this like little kid who wanted to get punk rock records and things. And in those days, there was you wouldn't necessarily know if somebody was in town unless you had seen it in the paper or whatever else. So I had no idea that Billy Idol was in town, and they took my dad, who would bring me there, and she goes, would he want to go see Billy Idol? And he was like, oh, absolutely. And they, they're like, well, we've got tickets, you guys could go or whatever. And so they gave us tickets to go see Billy Idol, and it was my first experience seeing a live show. And I always laugh because it was also my first experience seeing technical difficulties in a live show. And I always laugh because I believe he did Rebel Yell about 8 times because there was always now that I've played a billion shows, I know how many things can go wrong on stage. But as a kid, I had no idea what the hell was happening. But he would get through like the first verse, and then there'd be something wrong, and he'd go, no, fuck it, we're starting over again. And then they'd start over again, and he'd get to the point where there was something wrong, and then they would stop, and there'd be this like chaos on stage of crew guys running around and fixing stuff and adjusting things. And I was a little kid, so like I think at some point we had to just like go home because I was like my bedtime. So my parents were like, well, we got to go. And so, unfortunately I had to leave or maybe fortunately, during the LA Woman Doors medley. I got to leave during that.
Was that a questionable moment in rock history? That moment?
What do you mean, the LA Woman
Yes.
jam?
Yeah. It was, wasn't it? Yes.
I'm not a Doors guy. I'm not a jam band guy. That's probably sacrilege to say that, but it's not my thing.
Actually, that's an important point. What was the first music that you heard that you had a strong reaction to that wasn't love? Because there was a lot going on that has nothing to do with what you were into at the time. You were definitely on your own trip.
Yeah. I didn't dislike pop radio. I just didn't care about it. When I was a kid, it just felt like disposable. And also, it's the era in which I grew up. The early to mid 90s were such a poor time for any kind of career longevity. You're talking about, Marcy Playground and Tonic, and nothing against these artists, but it was a tremendous one-hit wonder situation. Artists that maybe now in the social media age would have had the opportunity to build a career, but when you're basing your whole career on a big hit single and then being completely anonymous, there was really no I didn't know anybody who was a fan of those bands. You know what I mean? And when I'd go to school and tell the other kids who I was into, it was like I, was speaking in like some sort of alien language. There was no connectivity. I remember one time there was a kid who came up to me and said that his dad listened to Wasp. And I was like, well, I guess that's as close as I'm going to get to somebody who knows anything about like my music. So he was like, oh yeah, I like Wasp. So then we talked about how I liked, XYZ band. And then he talked about how he kind of knew who Blackie Lawless was. And I was like, that was my friend for the day. But yeah, I didn't dislike it. And I've always enjoyed good songs, regardless of what their genre was. And so, there's certainly quite a bit of that era that a lot of the like alternative pop rock stuff is pretty fun. But as far as dedicated fandom, I was never really into it. But to be completely honest with you, I also was never really into the vast majority of what's seen as like monolith classic rock, because where I grew up, I took that as like the music that like the like hillbillies that yelled at me listened to. You know what I mean? Like the people who were screaming obscenities at me for wearing eye makeup. So in many ways, I wound up discovering a lot of those classic rock bands later in life and gravitating towards them later. But many of them I just don't have any affinity for. Like, and it's not, I'm sure people will get mad at me for saying it and whatever, but I don't have any deep affinity for like Deep Purple, and things kind of that ilk. And again, it's my own ignorance maybe, but I just don't really enjoy it. I've always been someone who's been very into chorus driven music, and my favorite Led Zeppelin song is the Immigrant Song because there's an actual hook to the song. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm someone who really likes maybe in some ways like a saccharine big sing-along chorus. And a lot of that classic rock stuff just doesn't have it.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, you've been bringing that, and you do it in both projects. You like a big sing-along. There's a big sing-along element to, it seems like, all of your work. And just to go back to like childhood and to like teenage life, like You did a tune called Knives and Pens off your first album. That was your first really big song, right?
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote the lyrics to that song at I was probably 15 or 16.
Yeah, right. Well, because that's had 130 million views, which is pretty insane. That's a nice impact. What would you go back and tell that 15-year-old kid about how that panned out now?
I think that the level of ego and hubris that's necessary for a teenager to be like, oh, I'm going to be a rock star now, uh, it is such that I believe that at 15 I was so certain that this was all going to work out that any potential roadblocks or things that would be in the way were inconsequential because I had such a steadfast belief that if I worked my ass off and I didn't let anything get in the way, I could make this happen. So if anything, I would probably just, say, yeah, just keep pushing,
Keep on trucking. You did, yeah,
Yeah.
because you started your band in your hometown. Um, were the people you started the band with, did they have the same level of ambition?
It's impossible to gauge somebody else's level of ambition. And it really wasn't, it would be impossible for me to know what their end game was with any of it. Um, there was, I mean, like 20 different people. There would be people who would be in the band for a week and then they'd get a job and then they couldn't be in a band anymore. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't, wasn't really like a lot of like sad breakup stuff. It was trying to find somebody who could play an instrument long enough to get through these two shows that I had booked at a bar, and dressing them up in skeleton makeup for the weekend. You know what I mean? Like it was, and in that case, there were certain people, like Chris Stewart, who was the guitar player who co-wrote Knives and Pens, was one of my best friends in the world. And he wanted to do this, but he also was at a different place in his life. We were both really young kids. And I said, I'm going to drop out of high school and move to LA. And, that isn't what everybody can do. And, I've remained close with him over the years. He comes out to our shows when we're in town, and he actually wound up later in life, wound up working for us for a time as a guitar tech. And he was in a band that was signed to another label. And, that certainly is in a situation where I was alone in my ambitions, but I just was actionable in those ambitions and the ideas that I had and feelings that I felt. I took the step and was willing to live in my car and eat, expired taquitos from 7-Eleven to live as a teenager. And not everybody else was ready or willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's fortuitous in the timing, and I think what you were saying before about all of those guys of the painted face 70s, 80s vibe saw themselves a bit in you guys and were
Yeah,
excited to see themselves in someone again. Like, I think it was,
sure.
it was a dark time for their kind of, it was a dark time for that kind of rock and roll. The night, yeah.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
yeah.
it manifested itself in fun ways. I mean, we would be in our little shitty rehearsal space in Hollywood, a place that no longer exists. It's now actually a urgent care facility. It was a place called Cascade Studios, which was this old kind of rundown hole in the wall rehearsal space that everybody in the history of rock had rehearsed. And we were there in our little tiny room. And one day you look over and there's the five of us in the room, and there's enough room for maybe half of another person in this room, and that's Sebastian Bach watching us rehearse and rocking out to our rehearsal in that little room with us, or Steven Adler bringing us, Mountain Dews or whatever to our room from Guns N' Roses. Or like, it was a very cool time to be suddenly a band that was completely unaccepted by our peers and seen as invalid by the larger rock community. And yet all these bands that we had idolized were coming to us and saying, wow, you guys are bringing something back. It galvanized us in a way that I don't know that you could really describe. When you go out on a festival stage and people are booing at you, you don't really give a shit because you're doing it right. You're doing what you wanted to do.
You did do an iconic, I mean, the Revolver Golden Gods Awards on
Sure.
YouTube. That was that was a beautifully iconic moment. I'm glad you got in there, and it's a fantastic. It's very rock and roll. Let's be real.
Well,
Like,
I was actually talking about this earlier today, with Johnny from Avenged Sevenfold, actually, because I was describing what this is, because what that moment was. And and we were talking about just, the idea of being bands that wore makeup in the early days and sort of the vitriol that can come from the metal community for that kind of thing. And the thing is, I don't regret having yelled at people for being mean. What I regret is, saying things about people's body and making fun of people in a way. But what had happened was, for me, at the time, I'm 20 years old at the time that that's happening. I am only a few years removed from just trying to walk to the grocery store in my hometown and having people throw shit at me out of the back of a truck and screaming at me for the way I look. And in that moment, it became this amalgam. Have you seen Suicide Squad, the new one?
No, not yet.
Okay. There's a moment where one of the characters, the way he gets his superpower is to picture everybody as his mom. And in that moment, all of the faces in that crowd that were booing at us turned into just this like amalgam kind of hillbilly guy yelling at me from Cincinnati, like whoever that was. And I just kind of just lost it, and at the end of the day, again, I don't regret defending myself. I do have regrets about some of the terminology and words that I use because it isn't representative of the way I feel or how I like to talk.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a moment, and it is. I do think it's always interesting when the place that you claim is being acknowledged by the people in the know rather than the broader community. It's a big deal, and I think it would keep you warm at night a bit to have people be fans of you when that is the broader thing. I think it's probably resentment as well. You guys, the pretty boy thing. They resented you. Let's be honest. There's a lot of, there's a lot of. I'm not going to say anything, but there's a lot of not that. And you obviously you captured a girl audience as well, which is a whole thing as well. Which is
that is its own thing that I think has played out over the last number of years that I think people are becoming more and more aware of, is that there is an inherent sexism to the feeling that if young girls like something, there is this belief that it's somehow not valid. And that is nothing but sexism. When we were first starting, people would say things to us like, well, we got to make sure on this next record, you got to start getting more of a male audience. Because as if to say that having young girls like what you do is they're so fickle and they won't stay with it. Well, that was just provably false. The reality is, whether you want to look at young pop artists or whatever it is, New Kids on the Block are touring in arenas right now. And I'm not comparing us to what that is. But what I'm saying is that the idea that a young girl is incapable of liking something cool and we have to only focus on old dudes, that's the only way that you can be cool, seems a little ridiculous. And guess what? As we continued on and as the band grew, you look out on our audience at our shows and it's every type of person now. It's not just little girls. And by the way, it doesn't matter who it is. If anybody likes what you do, you should be so lucky. So I've always had a real chip on my shoulder for the pretty thinly veiled sexist remarks of young girl audiences are too fickle and that kind of thing. Because the reality is those girls stuck with the band early, as did those teenage boys, as did everybody on every end of the spectrum of gender. And now you look at a Black Veil show and you see 60-year-old metal dudes and you see 14-year-old girls, and they're both enjoying the rock show. And it's existed, by the way, throughout all of the history of rock music or pop culture. If you watch the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, you're not hearing a bunch of old men yelling and screaming that they're there. If you watch the early days of Def Leppard, it's young people, both, of all genders, young people in their teens drive what eventually becomes a cool thing, because that is the time in your life where the things that are important to you are the most important to you, and they shape so much of your ideology and who you become as an adult. I can say safely that the two of us both still enjoy things and listen to things that we did when we were that age, because it's formative for who you are. Maybe not all of it. You may have discovered things later, but I don't know anyone who has completely removed the things that they enjoyed when they were that age, because when you are becoming the person that you're ultimately going to become, that transitionary period for any person is hugely important. And that's when, for me, I put on an Alkaline Trio record and I am immediately 15 and angsty and so excited, you know.
I think you're bang on. Like, who doesn't still listen to their 15-year-old playlist? Like, and yeah, okay. Now, one thing we ask every artist on this show is the 5 songs that changed your life. So what are yours?
5 songs that changed my life. So I'm not going to pick my 5 favorite songs. I'm going to pick the ones that come to me as impactful. So I would say KISS Unholy, because as a 4-year-old watching the music video for that song, I was like, I want to get some of that shit, whatever this is. Like this, I got to do this thing. And that was hugely important to the trajectory of my life. Springsteen, Born to Run, because as a 16-year-old driving around in my dead-end town, I was certain that the song was written for me and about me, and I couldn't wait to run and, you know, see the world and do all the things that I had dreamt of doing. And I'd drive my little shit car as fast as I could down back streets and listen to that record and scream along the lyrics. Let's see. Alkaline Trio, This Could Be Love, because it was the first song on Good Morning, which is the first record that I listened to and thought I could write songs. Not because they were easy, but because they were saying something that I felt. And prior to that point, I had listened to bands like, you know, classic rock bands who were speaking about partying, something that me as a teenager knew really nothing about. Punk rock bands that were talking and largely about monsters and aliens and demons and horror movies, things that I had not experienced. While I enjoyed, I was not, I was not a werewolf, so it wasn't a one-to-one comparison for me. And bands like AFI, whose lyrics I, to this day, still have no idea what he's saying. But that's not a criticism. Davey's an incredible writer, but as a kid, I had no idea what the fuck the songs were about. So listening to This Could Be Love, and then every subsequent song on that record, I thought, the things I think can be lyrics, and, you know, crazy things and dark things and emotional things. This could be, I can make cool rock songs with these things. And I, previous to that, had no experience hearing anything like that. Then let's see, what else? This is a hard question, I gotta be honest with you. Some Kind of Hate, Misfits, because it was the first song that I learned on an instrument, playing it on bass and standing in my room and trying to sing while I played bass to the CD was important. And it was the first song I ever recorded myself doing and then put onto MySpace as a 13-year-old or whatever. And then shared, like, here's me covering a song on a little cassette recorder. So that was my first recorded material, was Some Kind of Hate, I think. Yeah. Let's see. The final song in my 5 songs. Cat Stevens, Father and Son. It is the most, to this day, and this is a very not metal take, but I'm not really much of a crier. I cry occasionally by anybody, but it's very few and far between. It's just not something that comes up a lot. I have never in my entire life been able to listen to that song and not get choked up. You could put it on right now and put on half of it, and I would get choked up. And the reason being is that I remember listening to it with my mom and her explaining to me what is being said. And it's a conversation between a father and son about the son has to leave and wants to see the world and wants to get away. And the father saying, don't stay, you know, and then him saying also, like, I know you have to go. And it mirrored so much of my life of, I loved my family. I'm really close to my parents. And yet I really wanted to go. And how hard that is to be somebody that both loves their family and wants to travel and see the world and tour, you know. So that will always have a really special place for me.
Interesting, like talking about your hometown. So you named your second solo album Ghost of Ohio, and in your book you talk about running around a haunted hospital and stuff like that. How did that those kind of experiences feed into your whole concept of darkness and life and death and all that kind of stuff? Because it's quite a big deal to put your home state on your solo album.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of those things is all of us who are from a specific place, I think you spend your life running away from it, and then at some point you realize how much of your identity is shaped by it. And I wanted to be able to do something that was both a indictment and a love letter to the place I grew up in. An indictment of the things that I struggled with and why I left, and a love letter for the things that mattered the most to me and why I love going back there. It's a very difficult thing, especially if you grow up in a small town, to a certain street, the main drag through the town I grew up in called Delhi. The main Delhi Pike is the main street. And on that street, every childhood bad, sad thing happened to me, and every exciting thing happened to me, and all in the same block. So how do you deal with that reality that where you're from it's everything that you are, both good and bad, in so many different ways. And so, I think it's informative of everything, but I've been obsessed with or scared of scary things since I was very young. I remember watching, there's a TV show in the States in the 90s called Are You Afraid of the Dark? And it was just like, PG horror show. It was like R.L. Stine kind of shit. But as a kid, there was an episode where there was like clowns, and I don't have a fear of clowns. But for some reason, as a kid, this thing freaked me the fuck out. And like to the degree where I was a normal kid who could sleep at night. And then literally the day after that, the next like 5 years of my life were spent building booby traps outside the door and putting cans on the floor and leaving all the lights on in my room and becoming obsessed with how I could trap the monster that is definitely coming for me. Like, it was literally, that episode was a huge paradigm shift in my whole reality of what I saw at nighttime. And then because of that obsession, I started getting even more into, whoa, this scares me, but I like this stuff. And then I saw the album cover for the Misfits Famous Monsters CD, and I was like, oh, this is like the best of both worlds. This is everything. Like, this is cartoon, comic book, scary, horror, everything, And so that was like, again, one of those things where I go, I want to be that. I'm walking through the CD store and I see that record and I go, whatever that is, I'm going to dress up in crazy makeup and shit and do that.
Well, actually, when you were forming the band, your visual identity, what you were listening to at that particular point in time, what was on high rotation, and what did you guys at that point fan out on? Like maybe when you were writing first album. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, the band really is kind of a cross section. It is. I was chiefly influenced by mostly punk rock bands, Social Distortion, Misfits, AFI, Alkaline Trio, certainly the most, but also psychobilly bands and, goth rock bands like Sisters of Mercy and Lords of the New Church and that kind of thing. Like, that was where my influence came from. Mm-hmm. And then Jake and Jinx, when I met them, they were interested in obviously Metallica, but also, very intricate metal and things that I had no frame of reference with. The only cross section of our interest was, Metallica, and then the rest of it was stuff I had no knowledge on. And so when we were writing our first record, it really is me writing what I think are like Social Distortion sounding melodies over just shredding guitar. Mm. And that is sort of like where we ended up later down the line. And then screaming and stuff came into the picture because I couldn't figure out how to write a bridge. So I would just yell over it.
Maybe this is the origin of all screaming, singing metalcore.
Yeah, well, I know for me, it's just like, well, I don't really have anything for this section, so I guess I could just yell here.
You got a tiny bit of scream on the new album. Tiny bit of just a touch of scream. Mm-hmm. Just a moment.
It's in the bridge.
Yeah, you just had to throw it in there. Just harking back. It is a metalcore record.
I mean, well, ultimately it started out with that, and then I just grew to enjoy it. I like the tenacity of it when it's used in places. You know what I mean? Like when it's part of a package as opposed to like, this is all I've got. Mm. For me personally, I like it as an accent. So and I do it live. We do the old songs. I do all the screaming parts. It's just less and less when I write. I'm less interested in doing it as often. Yeah.
What you had Ozzy's bass player produce your first album. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's pretty badass. Just saying.
Blasko, he has been our manager and my manager since I was just about to turn 18, and he's still my manager and has been in my life as like an older brother for, I mean, I'm 30 years old. He's been in my life since I was a teenager. So,
Holy shit.
yeah, he's one of my closest friends and has been just, again, like an older brother, and has guided me through this industry and taught me so many things over the years. And we have an incredibly close relationship.
Wow. So he's not just Ozzy Osbourne's bass player. He's actually an incredibly significant figure in your life.
Yes.
What kind of music did he introduce you to?
He's into like doom metal. He likes the sludgy stuff. So anytime I'm in his car, I'm hearing bands I've never heard of before, playing songs that are in the lowest possible tuning you could imagine. That each song is 45 minutes. It's, you know, that's that. The doom metal thing is like there's like 3 songs on an album, and the album is an hour and a half long because, like, you know, every song is super long. So my introduction to doom metal comes solely from Blasko.
You haven't quite taken it on board in your own band. Not necessarily.
No.
Not conducive.
Sometimes, you know, we'll have a tuning and he'll be like, "Hey, that's a great tune." You know, it's like drop B or something. Hey, very good.
Oh, it's nice. It's nice to have those like mentory characters in one's.
Yeah, I mean, he's been incredible to me. There's really nobody in this industry, and quite frankly, in my personal life, who's been, you know, as impactful and as important to teaching me how to kind of do this.
Yeah. What were the 3 things he taught you that were the most important?
Be on time, get there early, and then be on time. So anything that you're ever doing, make sure that you show up punctually. And I have kept to that. I arrive to everything 25 minutes early, needing to pee, and sitting in my car waiting for the thing to start. So thank you very much, Blasko, for your advice of being early to everything. It's sort of funny when he and I go to meetings together. We arrive like a full hour early because we're outdoing each other of who's going to get there earlier. Yeah, that is, you know, that's one. But I would say, you know, 2 and 3 are centered entirely around just professionalism in the industry and how to you know, have your shit together. He's somebody who wakes up early, gets on his emails, gets his work done. And for me, my job in this business is to make sure that the operations of this band are running smoothly and to take ownership over the things that are important. And so, you know, he has taught me so many lessons about just showing up and working hard and giving a shit more than anything else. And that's a tool that I think anybody could use.
Yeah, well, they're important things. No one really talks enough about the early thing. Anthony Bourdain, actually, I watched a doco with him recently, and he was talking about how if someone doesn't show up early, I don't work with them. It's just, the life is too short, and the business is just, no one has time to wait for you. You're not Mariah Carey. Like, no one really has time to wait for Mariah Carey either, but that's a side note. That's true.
But I say this having been someone that had to push this interview back 15 minutes because something else I did ran over. So
that's like, I'm really comfortable with that. I'd rather you take a moment than, and also in my business, I've spent a lot of time waiting. There's a moment, you know, I've spent a lot of time waiting before a show with a book. Bring a book. Embrace the time. There's always a time. And I got to read more of your book. I found out this morning you had an autobiography. Didn't expect it. So did get into it. It's a fun read. I'm just
Thank you.
Yeah.
Much
You're young
appreciated.
to have you're young to have a book. So when I found it, I'm like,
that's why I'm hesitant to call it an autobiography.
Yeah.
I read a lot, and I read a lot of memoirs too. I'm very interested in like rock star memoirs.
Yeah.
And what I had found over the years is that the first, you know, 15 to 20 years of a lot of these people's lives are pretty much glossed over because the information is not as interesting to people because you're so far removed from it. To hear about when this rock star who's 78 years old was growing up on the dirt patch with a hula hoop for a, you know, and like, you know, like there was no television or whatever, shit that is so far removed from our own current reality that it's less interesting. And then the nuanced details and the kind of like minutia is gone because most of these people can't remember it because it's not their fault. It was 60 years ago.
Yeah, so, and they lived that life.
Yeah. And so I just decided, wouldn't it be fun to, while I'm still the age that I am, talk about the first 30 years of my life and what led to me being in this band while I'm still a peer of many of the people who are just coming up in music, people who are just starting bands, people who are fans of mine, to be able to give ideas and stories predicated on the idea of how me, a person who is not shit from the sky by God to rock the world, just a regular person who's not remarkable in any way, could do this for a living and be able to share what that is to make that happen. I thought it would be cool to do that now, so that later in life, you know, I can write my full life memoir.
The next phase. Well, this show is built on the foundation that first formative period is quite significant, and that who you are as a fan informs who you are as an artist, and a lot of your youth is being a fan. I think it's an interesting take. Well, okay, the new album we should cover because it's coming out in a couple weeks. No, this week.
It's coming out in 8 days. It's coming
out this week because this is coming out on Monday. So it's coming out this week. What about this album reflects the kid you were as a 15-year-old?
I mean, it really represents what I would have wanted to hear as a 15-year-old. You know what I mean? Like it's grand in scale, and it's fun, and it's dramatic and ridiculous, and, you know, cinematic and musical theatery and big giant guitar solos and huge choruses. And it's all the things that I loved then that I still love now. You know, For me, I've always said this band represents the band that I would have always wanted to see my whole life. And so getting to be in my favorite band is a huge treat.
Yeah, totally. Well, there's some bangers on there. There's some big tunes, and that's a fun time. You know, that's a good. Okay, we're gonna get to some random questions now to close it out. Who would you, given the choice of anyone in the world, who would you like to be locked in an elevator with?
My wife.
Yeah, that's an excellent choice. Forget that Stephen Hawking's and which wouldn't. No, he'd probably be pretty fun. When was the last time you sang to yourself?
Sang to myself?
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah, but never anything good. Just silly jingles from commercials that I remember, or noises, or whatever.
When was the last time you sang to someone else? This doesn't. Well, you're on tour, so it's a terrible question.
Constantly. But there's, in case you're curious, there is a jingle for the water park in Cincinnati called The Beach that used to play on TV in the 90s. That you can look it up on YouTube. Just Cincinnati, The Beach. I believe they still use the same song. But that song has been stuck in my head for 25 years. So that's what I'm always singing in my head.
We'll put that in the YouTube description just for the fans.
Okay, cool.
Someone wants to hear it. I mean, it's novel. For what in your life do you feel most grateful?
My family, you know, my wife, my parents, the people that support me, the audience that I've been able to gather over the course of my career. But above all else, just to have my family and to be somebody that's been given such an incredible gift of having such a supportive family for my whole life.
What was the soundtrack to Falling in Love for you guys?
For me, it was her acoustic record, because we were on tour together, and I would go back into my bunk at the end of the night after we would have our like on venue date where we'd walk around the venue and hold hands. And I would listen to her acoustic record called The Kids Will Take Their Monsters On, and I would just be like, I love this person so much. Dude, she's got the best voice and the best lyrics, you know. That was for me. That was it.
Now, if you could wake up tomorrow having gained one ability, what would it be?
To extend my arms far enough to fit all of the grocery bags in one, so that when I'm going from my garage to my front door, it's not hard to carry all the bags at once after we go to the store. That's
absurdly practical.
Yeah,
not necessarily.
And
okay.
You have no idea how often I think about this power, how much it would come in.
Well, I like the power of our random questions to tap into the real shit. The song that's been in your head for 20 years, falling. Yeah. So shout out to these ridiculous things. Your musical Mount Rushmore. We'll close the show with your musical Mount Rushmore. What would be the faces carved into it?
All right. Matt Skiba, Paul Stanley, Mike Ness, and Billy Idol.
Yeah, that's a solid selection. Yes, Good. Well, thank you, Andy. Thanks for joining us. It's been a really fun show.
Thank you.
I feel like we've...
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah.